Our tale is set in the mortal lands of Middle-earth at the end of the Second Age. The island of Numenor has been destroyed by the Valar. Sauron has forged the One Ring, but the last alliance of elves and men will not come to pass for another 100 years. In this time, elves and dwarves resist the forces of evil as best they can, our tale of Elbeth and Finlon being a case in point. One fine spring day, west of the Misty Mountains, in the Elven Havens, the elf maiden Elbeth Silvermane, gifted in the ways of far-seeing, came across something disturbing. Quickly, Elbeth showed her father, Lord Quingal, what she had chanced upon. And Lord Quingal summoned his 3 most trusted allies to his hold of Elgon, the House of the Silver Trees. First of Quingal's allies to arrive was Lord Thanel of the Mountain Elves from their secret stronghold high up in the vales of the Blue Mountains. The Mountain Elves were distant relations of the High Elves and were regarded as being somewhat austere and uncultured by Quingal's people. Nonetheless, they were guardians of a great secret known only to the elves and brave warriors. The second of Lord Quingal's allies to arrive at the House of the Silver Trees was Lord Dodin of the Iron Fists, representing the Dwarven folk. Lord Quingal had his daughter Elbeth show Lords Thanel and Dodin what she had discovered. An army of trolls and goblins had been secretly assembled by the Dark Lord in the marshes of Nindelf, in what would be called in later times the Brown Lands. This foul army could launch a surprise attack on the elves who dwell about the plains to the east of Fangorn Forest, said Lord Thanel. All the dwarves who make the hills there their home, said Dodin. Both our peoples are in great danger, though they know it not, agreed Quingal. It was at this point that Quingal's third ally, Grimroot the Ent, arrived at Elgon. Grimroot apologized for his lateness, blaming it on his great age and stiff limbs. The lords moved to the great hall so that the mighty Grimroot might not have to stoop. Returning to the matter at hand, Lord Quingal said, "We must send word of this evil army to our kin in the east, but how?" You elves and the eagles often scheme together, said Dodin the dwarf lord. Why not send one of them with the news? Because Dodin, son of Bodin, son of Jodin, son of Wodin, replied Kringle, the skies above Fangorn Forest have become treacherous to all that fly. The Lord of the Eagles has sent 4 of his young braves across Fangorn. Each was intercepted by winged beasts in the service of the Dark One. The Lord of the Eagles will send no more. What of magical means to warn the people in the east? Asked Lord Thanal of the mountain elves. At this, Kringle's daughter Elbeth stepped forward. My sister Talaron, lady of the high elf city of Arundel, believes the orbs she possesses to be tainted with an evil, and has sworn never to use it, Elbeth explained. Then we must muster our forces and march quickly east, said Lord Dodin. Raising such an army would take time we do not have, said Lord Kringle, and besides, such a bold move on our part would only alert the great enemy that we know of his secret army. Lord Dodin thought for a moment. What then is to be done, or are our kin in the east already doomed? There is always hope, Lord Dodin, replied Lord Kringle. I believe that subtlety and stealth are called for here, explained the high elf. Dwarves don't do stealth, said Lord Dodin. Then perhaps it is time they learned, said Lord Thanal of the mountain elves. A small party will have a greater chance of travelling through Fangorn Forest undetected, said Lord Kringle. Why not just avoid that dreaded place? Asked the dwarf. To go around Fangorn Forest would add weeks to the journey, explained Lord Kringle. But one does not simply walk into Fangorn Forest, said Lord Dodin, and for once Lord Thanal of the mountain elves agreed with the dwarf. It was at this point that Lord Kringle turned to Grimroot. The Ent rose slightly and began to speak in Entish. Lord Kringle interrupted him, saying that while Entish was indeed a most beautiful language, it took rather a long time to say anything in, and time was something they had precious little of. Of course, said the Ent, who went on to speak in the common tongue. Not all the trees of Fangorn grow upwards towards the sky. The great tree we Ents call Neldor grows parallel to the earth. Why it chooses to grow in this way, only the Valar know. Neldor is one of the oldest trees of Fangorn, and also one of the most magical. Its branches crisscross the forest and reach into every corner. I myself have travelled upon it on many occasions. Time flows differently upon Neldor, and provided one can discern the way, it is possible to use the tree to cross Fangorn at considerable speed. Lord Kringle thanked the Ent. If a small party could locate this tree, they could travel along it and warn our peoples in the east of the perils that await them in the marshes of Nindelf. I am too old to travel so far, said Grimroot sadly, and the nearest of my kind too far to summon to be of any help. Without an Ent, what hope is there of finding this magical tree? Asked Lord Dodin. It was then that Lord Kringle's daughter Elbeth once more stepped forward and spoke. I believe that I can find this great tree and travel along it to the eastern edge of Fangorn, if Grimroot will share with me all that he remembers of it. I would be glad to, my lady, said Grimroot. You would allow your daughter to put herself in such danger? Asked Dodin, dumbfounded. I cannot stop her, said Lord Kringle. I will do all in my power, Lord Dwarf, to warn my sister of the danger she and her people are in. It was I, after all, who discovered the threat, said Elbeth. By the ancient forefathers, Lord Dodin said, looking around the elven hall, it would seem that elven maidens are braver than their menfolk. It was then that Finlon, the only son of Lord Thanal of the mountain elves, stepped forward and spoke. Fair lady, our dwarven friend is quite right. An elven maiden, no matter how brave, ought not go alone into the dark wood. I am Finlon of the Blue Mountains, and I would gladly accompany you on your journey. And I would gladly accept your offer of escort, Finlon of the Blue Mountains, replied Elbeth. Then you have my sword, my lady, said Finlon. And Finlon's father, Lord Thanal, was pleased. Then other elves, both of high and mountain lines, offered their blades. But Lord Kringle ruled against them. A small party will more easily avoid detection. Only wise Elbeth and brave Finlon of the elves shall go, declared Lord Kringle. It was then that Lord Dodin spoke. Lord Kringle, this plan of yours is elf clever to be sure, but I see a flaw in it. And what is that? Lord Kringle asked. My race are not easy to convince. A fact I know well, Lord Doden, said Lord Kringle with a laugh. Lord Doden laughed as well, before continuing. Even if these two somehow make it through Fangorn, walking along this tree of the Ents, do you seriously think my cousin, Lord Bendin, will marshal his war host on the word of two elves he has never seen before who appear as if by magic out of Fangorn? And what dwarfish answer do you propose as remedy to this elven flaw? Asked Lord Kringle. That I accompany your young elves and bring news of the hidden enemy to my cousin personally. If Lady Elbeth would accept my offer of assistance, that is. Your offer would be gladly accepted, Dwarf Lord, said Elbeth. Then you have my axe, my lady, said Lord Doden solemnly. And my spear, shouted a dwarf from the ranks of Doden's bodyguard. Lord Kringle ordered the low-born dwarf to come forward and speak. I am Guth the Hardcastle, said the dwarf, oath sworn to Lord Doden, son of Boden, for many a long year, and by my beard I will go with him and protect him, if your lordships will permit it. I have learned not to argue with a dwarf who has made up his mind, said Lord Kringle. Then it is agreed. Lord Doden, son of Boden, shall accompany Elbeth and Finlon, and Guth the Hardcastle here shall accompany Lord Doden, said Lord Kringle. Then Lord Kringle had Finlon and Lord Doden swear to protect his daughter with their lives. And when that was done, a feast was prepared. During the feast, Grimroot suggested Lord Doden leave his axe behind, as such weapons greatly offended the tree spirits, but Doden would not part with his heirloom. The Ent then suggested the dwarves leave their cumbersome shields behind, but Doden said that a dwarf without a shield felt naked and refused once more. When the meal was over, Grimroot told Elbeth all that he could remember of the great tree Neldor, how to locate it, and how to commune with it to find one's way along it. Lastly, Grimroot gave the party a solemn warning. Once you are on Neldor, do not leave it for any reason. Before retiring for the night, Lord Kringle took young Finlon aside. Protect my child, elf of the mountain. She is as precious to me as a flower of the night, said Lord Kringle. The existence of the flowers of the night was a secret known not by any race beside the elves, and Finlon was shocked that the elf lord would even mention them with other races in the same chamber. Finlon replied to the high elf lord with these words, Lord Kringle, should Elbeth not return to you here in the west, then neither shall I. Let us hope it does not come to that, said Lord Kringle. The very next day, for time was of the essence, the four heroes said their farewells and set off, escorted by way wardens of Lord Kringle's house. May Umo, Lord of the Waters, see over you, said Lord Kringle to his daughter and her three protectors as they set off on their perilous journey. They travelled light so they could move at speed, with only the elven bread known as limbess for food. The dwarves, despite their short stature, made a point of keeping up with the elves. Soon they had reached the misty mountains and began to climb. For beings that look so funny, they are a most serious race, said Finlon, referring to the dwarves. Perhaps, to them, we look serious and behave comically, replied Elbeth. Ents and elves and magical sideways growing trees. No sensible dwarf lord would ever get himself tangled up in such things, said Gunther to Lord Doden as they clambered. Indeed, this is another fine mess I've gotten us into, said Lord Doden, and the two dwarfs laughed. Climbing ever upward, they were soon high above the clouds. Do these mountains remind you of your homeland? Elbeth asked Finlon. They do, my lady. It is said that the elves of the Blue Mountains have hearts of stone. Is it true? It is true, my lady, replied Finlon with a smile. I have heard much about your homeland, but have never seen it with my own eyes. It is beautiful, is it not? Very. Should we survive what lies ahead of us, you must come and stay as my guest, said Finlon. I think I would like that, said Elbeth. The elven escorts accompanied the party to the eastern foothills. There, the elven captain wished the four adventurers well. Then he and his men turned back to the halls of Elgon with heavy hearts and were soon lost from sight. Elbeth, Finlon, Doden and Gunther passed without incident what would in later times be known as the Gap of Rohan, before coming to the western edge of Fangorn Forest. Despite the attentions of Númenorian shipbuilders and the orcs who had felled its trees to build their war machines during the War of Sauron and the Elves, Fangorn was far larger in the Second Age than it was in the Third, and it extended across the horizon as far as the eye could see. This will be a grand adventure, said Doden as they stood before the great forest. I am more concerned with saving lives than in having grand adventures, said Elbeth. I did not mean, began Doden. Interrupting and changing the subject, Finlon said, let us enter Fangorn while there is still light. And they passed into the forest's dark shadows. The fate of mortal kingdoms going with them into the trees. Fangorn Forest was old, full of memories, and its air was stuffy. The forests of Middle-earth are older than all the creatures that walk, for the trees were the first things the Valar breathed life into, remarked Elbeth. It smells, said Gunther. The four companions went as fast as the dark and tangled woods would allow. Deeper and deeper into Fangorn they went, walking in single file, with Elbeth always leading the way and Gunther bringing up the rear. The low-born dwarf would often turn and look over his shoulder, afraid that something might sneak up upon them. When evening came, they rested, but lit no fires so as not to offend the trees, and slept under the canopy of leaves. Finlon and the dwarves slept in their armour, with their weapons close to hand in case of attack. The elves made themselves beds of moss from where they could glimpse the stars through the leaf canopy. The stars having a special place to elfkind, more so than the moon or the sun, for it was by the light of the stars that the first elves awoke. While the dwarves, used to sleeping underground, found knots in the great trees to sleep under. When everyone had retired for the night, Dodin whispered to Gunther, "If a dwarf lord like myself were not careful, he might easily find himself falling in love with an elf maid like Elbeth." To this, Gunther said that while Elbeth was indeed beautiful, even for the fair elves, he preferred more buxom dwarven maids. "Very likely we are walking to our doom," remarked Gunther on their second day within Fangorn Forest. "But were we to stay at home, doom would find us out nonetheless," Lord Dodin replied. "At least then we would have the comforts of home," replied Gunther. "Spoken like a true hobbit," said Lord Dodin. For days the four searched for the tree Neldor, but found it not. "We dwarves prefer the mountains to the forest," said Lord Dodin. "I miss the wind on my face." "As do I," said Finlon, whose home was a hidden meadow ringed by a wall of rock. "But our journey leads this way." "So it does, elf of the mountain," said Lord Dodin. "So it does." The dwarves began to wonder if they would ever find the tree the Ent had spoken of, and began to lose heart. And then on the 5th day of searching, they entered a clearing, and before them was a strange sight indeed. A mighty tree growing sideways along the ground. "We have found Neldor," said Elbeth. And so began their journey along the great tree. Sometimes Neldor was lush with moss, sometimes it was just bare bark. And sometimes parts of it seemed infected or dead. Sometimes the going was easy and sometimes hard. This way and that the tree turned and branched through the forest. Sometimes Neldor led them up near the topmost canopy of leaves, and sometimes it took them deep underground into the roots of Fangorn, where goblins and other monsters might lurk. In the mornings, Elbeth went along Neldor a little way to divine their way. Finlon didn't like it, but the elf maiden needed to be alone with the tree. He told her not to stray too far and to come back the moment she sensed danger. On and on they travelled along Neldor's broad branches. Wherever Neldor led, Elbeth went, and wherever Elbeth went, Finlon and Dodin followed as they were sworn to do. And since Gunther was sworn to follow Dodin, he followed as well. A chain of unbreakable promises dragging them further and further into Fangorn, and into greater and greater danger. Always Elbeth led the way. Finlon admired her stamina and fortitude, but feared she might exhaust herself before their journey's end. "Slow down and preserve your strength, my lady," he advised her one evening. "On the eastern plains there is no one that you care for, is there, elf of the mountain?" Elbeth replied. "There is not," said Finlon, taken somewhat aback by Elbeth's words. "Then kindly do not tell me to preserve my strength. Did you agree to come on this journey simply to impress your father? I know what it is like to have a powerful parent." To these words Finlon did not reply. On and on they walked. To help pass the time as they wandered along Neldor, the elves and the dwarves shared stories of their peoples. To begin with, many discussions were had about the differences of the two races and which ought to be considered the superior. During these discussions there was often laughter and misunderstanding, for it was rare in those days for elves and dwarves to spend so much time in each other's company. Elbeth would ask about dwarven womenfolk, for it was a common belief among the elves that female dwarves had beards as long as their menfolk. On this subject, the dwarves were mostly silent, but on other subjects they were more forthcoming, as were the elves, and, in time, both elf and dwarf gained a new appreciation of the other's cultures and beliefs. And a great many misconceptions and misunderstandings were put to rest. "It seems to me that we dwarves have greatly misunderstood you elves. If we ever get out of this accursed place, I swear on my oath stone to enlighten my kin," said Lord Dodin. "And I will do the same," promised Finlon. Finlon often spoke to the dwarves of his home in the Blue Mountains. Finlon's home was not like Elgon, the House of the Silver Trees, or any other elf city. Finland's halls were carved with great skill out of the very rock face of tall mountains. "Who would have thought that an elf would be as at home in the mountains as a dwarf?" Dodin remarked. As they journeyed on, Finland told Dodin many things about his homeland. "The more you talk of home, elf, the more dwarfish you and your people sound." Though Finland talked often about his homeland, never did he mention the flowers of the night. Lord Dodin in turn told the elves of the mechanical marvels his people had built under the earth. As a result of these discussions, an unlikely friendship took root among the mighty trees. Finland and Lord Dodin became close. At least as close as an elf and a dwarf can be, for they were made by different Valar. Only on one occasion was there any real tension between the two. "I miss my chambers and mines as much as you miss your mountains and meadows," said Lord Dodin. "What do you know of our meadows?" Finland asked sharply. Before the dwarf could reply, Elbeth quickly changed the subject. "I do not think it far now," she said. "You said that yesterday," said Lord Dodin. One night, Lord Dodin rose to relieve himself, and found that Gunther was missing. Lord Dodin woke the two elves, and together they searched for him. They found the dwarf asleep, walking along Neldor. Lord Dodin feared that his servant had been enchanted by tree spirits, But when he woke him, Gunther said that he had often slept-walked as a beardless babe. The next morning, when Gunther realized that his lord and noble elves had been put in danger searching for him, he felt ashamed and swore then and there that he would not sleep another night in Fangorn, but would guard over the others. And this he did till the end. On and on they travelled along Neldor, coming to a part of the great tree that was particularly infected and decayed, and they did not linger. Suddenly, without warning, from high above them, goblins shrieked and rained black arrows upon them. Dodin and Gunther came forward and protected the elves with their shields. Outnumbered, with no missile weapons of their own, and with the goblins holding the high ground, the elves and the dwarves had no option but to retreat. Elbeth led them along another branch of Neldor, and the goblins and their black arrows were soon far behind them. "I knew these fine dwarven shields would come in useful," said Lord Dodin. "It would appear that the forces of the Evil One know of Neldor and use it themselves," said Elbeth. "Our journey just became more perilous," said Finlon. "Goblins do not like daylight, even within Fangorn. Their kind prefer to move around where it is darkest," said Lord Dodin. "It is the mark of all evil things that came from the great darkness, that they cannot abide the sun," added Elbeth. "We must avoid dark places if at all possible, and make haste, since news of our presence will no doubt spread," said Finlon. "A dwarf, Master Elf, is always in haste, even when he is standing still," said Lord Dodin. They had not gone far when Finlon sensed something was wrong. Telling the others to remain where they were, he went ahead to investigate, and saw 3 mighty trolls engrossed in a heated argument about something in black speech. What they were arguing about, Finlon couldn't say, and the party took another detour. "What in the name of the forefathers are hill trolls doing in Fangorn Forest?" asked Lord Dodin when it was safe to talk. "And since when do trolls wear armor?" asked Gunther. "We must be on our guard," said Finlon. "A dwarf lord, Master Elf," began Lord Dodin. "Is always on his guard?" interrupted Finlon with a smile. "Actually, I was going to say something else," said Lord Dodin. "What? What were you going to say if not that?" asked Finlon. "I forget. It matters not," replied Lord Dodin. When the hill trolls were far behind them on Neldor, Gunther began to sing. It was a song of great sadness. "Of what does he sing?" Elbeth asked Lord Dodin. "It is a lament for his lost love," explained Lord Dodin. "What is her name?" Elbeth asked. Lord Dodin laughed. "Why do you laugh?" Elbeth asked. "Because it is not a woman that Gunther sings for, but a barrel of ale." Suddenly Gunther stopped singing, for the sound of metal on wood could be heard coming from up ahead. "Hide," said Finlon. Above the four marched the goblin patrol. No one moved. Should they be discovered, they would have to fight their way out. And judging by the noise, the odds would be against them. No doubt they have heard a band of elves and dwarves are abroad and are searching for us, whispered Lord Dodin. No doubt, whispered Finlon. Eventually the noise of the goblins faded, and the party continued on their way. An hour or so later, Elbeth stopped. "I hear something." "What do you hear?" asked Lord Dodin, elven ears being keener than dwarves. "Snoring," said Finlon, who heard it too. They moved forward cautiously, and soon a sleeping mountain troll came into view. "Another way will have to be found," whispered Finlon. But this time Elbeth was sure there was no other way. "Then we will just have to sneak past it and hope it does not awaken," decided Finlon. "That is not much of a plan, elf," said Lord Dodin. But since he didn't have a better idea, they set off. Elves can move more silently than we dwarves. "I fear the elves will escape and we will be eaten," whispered Guthar. "May I be eaten first then? That way at least I will not have to hear you complaining," whispered Lord Dodin in reply. "Hill trolls, goblins, and now a mountain troll. Whatever next?" asked Lord Dodin when they were a safe distance from the sleeping giant. That night, as he had sworn to do, Guthar kept watch while the others slept. The next morning, after Elbeth had decided on their path, the party set off once more. Before long, a horn broke the silence of the forest. It was a deep, dark sound, and it could mean only one thing. "Goblins," said Finlon. "Where is it coming from?" asked Lord Dodin, gripping his axe firmly. "I cannot be sure," said Finlon. "They are in front of us," said Elbeth, whose ears were not encased in a helmet, "and coming this way." "Get behind me," said Finlon. "Retrace our steps." "They are getting closer," said Elbeth. "At least they do not have bows and arrows," said Finlon, preparing to bar the goblins' way so the others could make their escape. With great skill did Finlon hold the enemy at bay, death coming to all who came too close to his blade. Guthar stopped and turned round. "What are you doing?" Lord Dodin asked. "I am going to help the mountain elf," said Guthar. "Be careful. If you get killed, I will have no one to boss around." "I will keep that in mind," said Guthar. Guthar came to Finland's aid and fought as bravely as the elf. Side by side did the elf and dwarf fight, and none could better them. Then together they made their escape, the goblins being too demoralized by their losses to pursue. "Thank you, Guthar Hardcastle," said Finlon, when they had put a good deal of distance between them and their foes. "My sword arm was beginning to tire." Woken early the next morning by a troubling nightmare, Elbeth went to divine the way along Neldor. The encounter with the goblins the day before having set them back considerably. While she was communing with the great tree, she was surprised by a hill troll who knocked her unconscious and carried her away. Waking a short while later, Finlon sensed that something was wrong and roused Lord Dodin. Guthar, keeping guard, said that he had seen Elbeth leave before dawn, but that she should have come back by now. Splitting up, the dwarves headed back along Neldor the way they had come, while Finlon went ahead in search of Elbeth. Without Lady Elbeth, we may never find our way out of Fangorn, said Guthar to Lord Dodin as they searched. Our beards will turn white before another drop of ale passes our lips, lamented Guthar. Best we find her then, said Lord Dodin. Further along Neldor, Finlon found signs of a brief struggle, and followed a set of troll tracks that led away. It wasn't long before Finlon had caught up with the troll. Bravely, the elf of the mountain fought the troll, though outmatched considerably both in size and strength. Eventually, Finlon's blade found a gap in the troll's armor, and the monster's black blood poured onto Neldor. Screaming in pain, the troll swung its mace, and Finlon fell. Elbeth woke to find the troll dead and Finlon badly wounded. Shortly thereafter, the dwarves arrived. A heroic deed, to be sure, remarked Lord Dodin, amazed by what he saw before him. Who knew that an elf would be capable of such a feat of arms? Looking at the dead troll, and still in a state of shock, Elbeth said, It is said by those who know of such things that the trolls were made by the great enemy as a mockery of the Ents, as orcs were made as a mockery of us elves, and truly it is a horror to behold up close. We must carry our brave elf of the mountain from this place, for other evil creatures will smell blood and come, said Lord Dodin, picking up the wounded elf and carrying him away. When they felt safe enough to stop, Elbeth used all the arts known to the High Elves to heal Finlon. She nursed him for several days, but his injury was grievous. His wound is beyond my powers to heal, Elbeth informed the dwarves. I fear the troll's weapon was forged in the fires of Mordor. Finlon will die unless... Unless what? Asked Lord Dodin. Unless we can find something in Fangorn with more magic than I possess. A sapling of the white tree of Valinor. Do such things grow in Fangorn? Asked Lord Dodin. It is possible, Elbeth replied. The Ent warned us not to leave Neldor, Lord Dodin reminded the elf. Finland's life is at stake, said Elbeth. And more will die if we do not succeed in our mission, said Lord Dodin with a heavy heart. The dwarf thought for a while. I have grown rather fond of our mountain elf, and we cannot just leave him to die. We will leave Neldor, said Lord Dodin. Thank you, said Elbeth, and shortly thereafter leave Neldor they did. For 2 days they searched for a tree of Valinor, Elbeth praying to the Valar for guidance. What if we cannot find our way back upon the great tree? Guthar asked his lord as they searched. If that is our fate, then that is our fate, said Lord Dodin. And then on the third day, in a small glade, they found what it was they so desperately seeked. A tree of Valinor, and Finlon was laid before it. Two days later, Finlon awoke and insisted he was well enough to travel. The Valar must have been watching over the party, for they found their way back upon Neldor without much trouble, and were soon on their way eastward along it once more. When they had stopped for the night, Finlon went to Elbeth and thanked her. "I am forever in your debt," he said. Before Elbeth could reply, Lord Doden came and asked when dinner would be served. The truth was that they had been running low on food for some time. Even though the elven limbus had magical properties, the dwarves consumed enormous amounts of the stuff, and that night the four ate the last of their supplies. The next morning the elves and dwarves set off without breakfast. The dwarves complained bitterly, but there was nothing to do but tighten their belts. Surely there is only one thing that could have enabled an elf to defeat a hill troll in hand-to-hand combat, remarked Lord Doden to Finlon as they marched along. "And what, pray tell, is that?" asked Finlon. "Why, love, of course," said Lord Doden. Around mid-morning they heard once more the thing they had all come to dread, the horn of the goblins. "Run," said Finlon. The elves and the dwarves ran. Not far behind them, goblins came into view. "They have spied us," said Finlon, glancing over his shoulder. "Keep running," said Doden. "Abandon your shields," said Finlon to the dwarves so they could run faster. "Never," said Lord Doden. It was then that Guthar slowed down, then stopped running altogether. "Are you hurt?" Lord Doden asked. "No, my lord," said Guthar. "Then why have you stopped?" "Because I will stay behind and hold them off, so you and the elves can get away, my lord," said Guthar. To this Lord Doden said nothing. "Drink some ale for me when you reach our kin in the east," said Guthar, readying his spear. Doden swore that he would. "A lord cannot swear to a low-born dwarf," pointed out Guthar. "In times such as these, a dwarf lord does as he pleases," said Lord Doden. "Fare you well, Lord Doden, son of Bodin, son of Jodin, son of Woden," said Guthar Hardcastle. Then he turned towards the enemy. "Fly, my lord, fly," he said, and ran at the goblins. Brave Guther Hardcastle killed one and then a second goblin with his spear, before he was overwhelmed by sheer numbers and slain. Guther's act allowed Dodin, Elbeth and Finlon to get to safety. When they were far enough away from the goblins to rest, with tears in his eyes, Lord Dodin said, "He was as good a servant as any dwarf lord could have wished for." "Yes," said Elbeth, trying to comfort the dwarf, "and he was brave even for a dwarf." "He only ended up in a place such as this because of me," said Lord Dodin, reproaching himself. "He came to such a place because he freely chose to follow his lord," said Finlon. "We must keep moving," Finlon added. "Sleep now, faithful servant," said Lord Dodin, following his elven companions. Lord Dodin's mood did not improve. "Is there no end to this accursed tree?" he asked. "It would be wise not to speak ill of Neldor," suggested Elbeth. "Very likely the army in the marsh of Nendelf has already marched, and the kin we set out to warn already dead. We should turn back, gather a host, and avenge our kin in battle," said Lord Dodin. "Do not lose heart, Lord Dodin," said Elbeth. "Remember what Grimroot said, time is fickle here, it passes differently upon the great tree. Perhaps there is still time." "I have never trusted the Ents," said Lord Dodin. "They are too magical for my liking." "Grief clouds your thinking. We must go on, even if we are too late," said Finlon. Lord Dodin thought for a moment, saw that Finlon was right, and said, "Spoken like a true dwarf, elf of the mountain." "It is sad to think that Guther is not watching over us tonight," said Elbeth to Finlon when night fell and they rested. Both elves stared at the stars for some time before finding sleep that night. As for Lord Dodin, he slept not at all. The next morning they headed eastward once more. Lord Dodin's mood was not improved, and he spoke little to his elven companions. Shortly before midday, they heard the horns of the goblins once more. "Let us hide and hope they pass us by undetected," said Finlon. "The sun is strong today. It will be harder for them to see us." With the goblins getting ever closer to where they hid, Lord Dodin suddenly spoke. "It becomes not a dwarf lord such as myself to hide from his enemies. Like brave Gunther, I will stand and fight, and by doing so thereby contrive your escape and engineer a fine ending for myself. But Lord Dodin, if you do not come with us out of Fangorn, the dwarves of the east will not go to war, Elbeth said. Perhaps, but if you do not get out of Fangorn alive, the elves of Arundel will not attack, and they have more forces than my cousin. Besides, I am confident Finlon Trollslayer here will be able to persuade my kin to follow his banner. Nothing the elves could think to say could change Lord Dodin's mind. None shall pass as long as I stand. I will hold this part of Neldor for as long as I may. Now go, my lady. Then Lord Dodin turned to his elf friend, Finlon. Fare you well, elf of the mountains. Send my regards to my cousin. And if you make it back to your mountains, think occasionally of me. I will, said Finland, and left his dwarf friend to his fine ending. Lord Dodin rushed into the goblins, causing consternation and confusion. For a moment it looked as if Lord Dodin's great courage and prowess with axe and shield would drive the goblins away. But when they realized it was but a single dwarf that had charged them, they rushed Lord Dodin and soon cut the dwarf lord down. As fortune or the Valar would have it, the victorious goblins then took an upward branch of Neldor in search of the elves, while Elbeth and Finlon had taken a downward leading branch. And so the goblins and their terrible horn were soon far off in the distance. I should have gone with him and fought at his side, said Finlon. Had you done so, I would now be alone. And you took an oath to my father to protect me, did you not? Said Elbeth. I did, said Finlon. Exhausted and close to despair, the deaths of the dwarves lying heavy upon them, the elves went on. You asked me once if I had agreed to come on this journey not to save lives, but to impress my father, said Finland. It seems like an age ago now, Finland went on. I admit I came for both reasons, to save lives and to make my father proud. But now, in truth, I fear I really came for another reason altogether. And what reason was that? Elbeth asked. For a long time Finland spoke not. Finally he said cryptically, Lord Dodin was right about the troll. Elbeth didn't understand, but before Finland could explain what he had meant, the horn of the goblin sounded nearby and the two elves hurried on. With each step the two elves took, Neldor became more twisted and decayed. On and on did Elbeth and Finlon walk, more weary than they had ever been before. Yet they kept going, since to give up, to fail, would have meant the great sacrifice of the dwarves had been for nothing. Though they knew it not, Elbeth and Finlon were drawing close to the eastern edge of Fangorn Forest. Eventually they came to where the trees were thinner and more spread apart, and the sunlight came through the branches more brightly. Elbeth and Finlon embraced each other in relief. Then they left the mighty Neldor, Elbeth thanking the great tree for its help. Once they had left the trees of Fangorn, their journey to Arundel was untroubled. Upon arriving in the elven city, Elbeth and Finlon were quickly taken to Elbeth's sister, Lady Talron. And Elbeth explained all to her. The next morning an elven host left Arundel, making for the marshes of Nindelf, Lady Talron at its head. Elbeth and Finlon did not accompany Lady Talron, for they had business with the dwarves of the Brown Hills. "We have no dealings with elves," said the dwarf sentry when the two elves presented themselves outside the dwarf hold. "We must speak to Lord Bendin on a matter of great import," said Finland. "I will see if he will speak to you, though I very much doubt it," said the sentry, and left. After some time, Lord Bendin appeared on the battlements. "I am Lord Bendin. What are you doing in my realm?" "I bring sad tidings, Lord, of your cousin, Lord Dodin." "And what sad tidings are they?" "Lord Dodin fell in battle in Fangorn Forest." "And how is it that you elves know of such things?" Lord Bendin asked. "We were there when he fell." The dwarf lord was silent for a while, then he spoke once more. "Who are you who creeps upon my hold uninvited and brings such woeful intelligence?" "I am Finlon of the Blue Mountains, and this is Elbeth, daughter of Lord Quingle of the High Elves of the West. We were friends of your cousin, Lord Dodin." "Elves don't have dwarven friends, and dwarves certainly do not have elfish ones," said Lord Bendin. "What game is this?" Then Finland told Lord Bendin all that Lord Dodin had told him on their long journey through Fangorn, and as Finland spoke, a smile slowly formed on Lord Bendin's face. Two nights later, the goblin army left the marshes of Nindelf and headed for the elven city of Arundel. The marching goblins and trolls were suddenly startled by a magical light. And companies of elven archers appeared on their flank. On Lady Tauron's command, the elves loosened their arrows. And scores of goblins fell. Volley after volley did the elves unleash into the goblin ranks. And more goblins died. Then dwarves armed with crossbows added to the deadly missile fire. Before the goblins and trolls could react, squadrons of elven heavy cavalry rode onto the battlefield. On Lady Tauron's orders, the elven knights charged into the mass of goblins. Behind the knights marched determined-looking dwarves armed with spears and two-handed axes. would-be ambushers had themselves been ambushed. And the battle was almost over before it had begun. The few goblins that managed to flee were hunted down and killed without mercy. When the fighting had ended, Lady Tauron, looking upon the many slain enemies strewn about the battlefield, declared victory. "A victory earned at a cost," said Finlon, thinking of Lord Dodin and Guthor. "We have but stalled the enemy, not defeated him," added Lord Bendin the dwarf. "Dark creatures such as these breed in great numbers in Mordor, and the losses sustained today will soon be replenished," the dwarf lord said. "No doubt you speak the truth, dwarf lord," said Lady Tauron. "But ought we not celebrate where and when we may?" Lord Bendin, still mourning the loss of his cousin, said nothing. "Perhaps," said Elbeth, "the victory today was that dwarf and elf put aside their differences and fought side by side." Following the battle, Finlon and Elbeth rested for a time in the city of Arundel. Then, with the forces of darkness checked, they were able to return to the west on the backs of eagles. There was much rejoicing in Elgon upon their return, and Elbeth was reunited with her father. Then Finlon and Elbeth journeyed to the land of the Iron Fists, and told Dodin's people of his great bravery and fine end. When they had spoken to the dwarven lords, Elbeth and Finlon visited Guthor's family alehouse. And tried some ale. And while it was not really to elven taste, the two drank much of it, and spoke of their fondness for Guthor to his kin, who had never served elfkind before. And when that was done, Finlon invited Elbeth to the Blue Mountains as he had promised, and Elbeth accepted his invitation. Arriving in the Blue Mountains, Elbeth gazed upon the flowers of the night, and felt, for a time at least, that all was right with the world. In due course, Finlon and Elbeth were wed, for as well as an unlikely friendship, an unlikely love had blossomed in the shadows of the great trees of Fangorn. Finlon the Troll Slayer and Elbeth the Tree Walker would, in time, come to raise an ill-fated orphan, brought to them by Umo himself. But that, as they say, is another tale for another time. Here ends the tale of Elbeth and Finlon.